This episode is in Topkapi Palace and I'm going to be discussing the Harem. So this is going to be interesting. So Topkapi Palace, the Sultan, he rules from here, the absolute ruler. He's in his palace, he's in the palace complex. This is where he's ruling and his government is operating. Inside the palace, in the Enderun, the inner section, is the Harem. And these are the Sultan's private quarters. And it's a place that he shares with his wives and his family. Now, Topkapi Palace was an imperial residence for 400 years. But the Ottomans are not the first to have a harem. The Islamic empires before them, the Abbasids and the Seljuks, also had harems. And the word harem means home of happiness. The sultans were very happy here. The security of the harem was secured by black eunuchs, which were called kızlara, the boss of the girls, so to speak. And the black eunuchs were actually slave boys, and they were captured in Sudan, Ethiopia, or East Africa. And these boys were captured, castrated, and sold on the slave markets. So the black eunuchs, their residence was also in the harem. They have their own building there. And this close proximity to the Sultan meant that they had quite a lot of influence. They had a very strong position in the palace. Now, the women of the harem were white female slaves, and they were caught through conquests of slave markets. And women from the Caucasus or the Slavic regions were preferred. So the girls are brought to the palace and they're converted to Islam. They get a new name. They're usually given a name relating to a flower or their personality, and they are trained in the palace ways. The harem itself had a very strict and hierarchical structure. At the top you had the Sultan's mother, the Valide Sultan, and underneath the girls, the wives and the concubines. And it was actually up to the Sultan to choose. He chose who was to be his concubine, and you were forbidden to turn him down. The women were on rotation, and the Sultan chose how that rotation worked. The harem was effectively a homegrown gene pool. These women slaves, they had no family, and their loyalty was to the Sultan. Not all the women in the harem were concubines. Some of them were domestic slaves. They had domestic roles in the laundry, the kitchen, and some were taking care of the children. If a concubine became pregnant, her status was elevated and she had her own apartment and privileges, but she no longer had access to the Sultan. Once there was a pregnancy, the Valide Sultan would kick into action. She'd talk to the treasurer and money was secured and big preparations were made for the birth. Births, the Sultan's children, the Shehzade, the sons or the girls, the sultanas, there was a big lavish ceremony with a procession, cannons are fired, messengers are sent out to the empire to tell them that a birth had occurred, and every birth was celebrated, so it was an expensive occasion. The sons' mothers, because of the succession, these slave women could potentially be the future mothers of Sultan, the future Valide Sultans of the empire. And the succession of the Ottoman Empire allowed all sons equal claim to the throne. And over time, this led to a lot of plotting and scheming among the mothers of the sons. And in later years, when we had the weak sultans, the women were more and more involved in palace politics and palace policy. And the Europeans came to call this the Sultanate of Women. So this doesn't always fit the stereotype that the West had of the harem of weak slaves. These women could be very powerful.